and welcome to Dustin's Kaleidoscope. I'm Dustin Dumas Weeks, and today I am here with Olivia Lewis-Chang and with Donna Beaton, and we are going to talk about gardening and why it's important. So let's get started. So first of all, thank you for being here, and I wanted to get an idea of why would one want to garden? You can start first if you'd like to.
Well, I think it depends on who you are, but for me, gardening is a connection to my grandparents and my great-grandparents, and it centers me, grounds me. I feel connected to the earth, and I think the joy of seeing things grow from nothing.
So is that the same or similar experience for you?
Yes, gardening, it's a very therapeutic activity, and like Olivia said, it's a connection to the earth and to nature that practically everyone can respond to on some level. Primarily, I was an ornamental gardener, meaning gardening around my house, the flower beds, etc., and only these past couple of years got into vegetable and food gardening.
Now, why was that? Why did you decide on vegetable gardening as opposed to the ornamental gardening?
Well, because we started the community garden here in South Orange, and actually it was my husband who said, well, why don't we join that? And I was kind of taken aback at first because I didn't know anything about growing vegetables, and you would think that someone who likes to garden would know how to grow anything, but I think we've all kind of lost that in a couple generations, all that knowledge that our grandparents, et cetera, had. And also in South Orange and Maplewood, we all have shady yards with clay soil, or people who live in apartments, so the community garden was kind of a good solution to that.
So how difficult is it if you are a complete novice? If you know the closest you've ever come to gardening is buying the cut flowers at Whole Foods. How difficult is it to start gardening, even at a level where you're not at a community garden, but just maybe a little plot of land in your backyard or something like that?
Well, it's not difficult. I think most people have an idea of how to garden. I think what people learn specifically, if they want to garden successfully, is how the ingredients that go into doing something like that. The issue of learning about soil, of learning about the weather, of learning about seeds, when to plant, when to harvest, how to do these things. And so a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of time, an investment in reading, and I think most people could be successful gardeners. I think people are more scared of gardening than they need to be.
Really?
Yes.
So what would you like? So for the person who is just trying to get their hands sort of dirty in the dirt, what would you suggest as far as the first thing to try your hand at?
Well, they have to decide if they want to, grow food, or do they want to do ornamental gardening, to beautify their property. And even just going to a big box store or a local nursery, you can get advice on picking out plants that are good for your location, and you can describe, well, I have sunny, I have shade, it's a dry area, and gardeners are always glad to help each other out and give advice, and you can find that person in the store, you can find a neighbor in the community garden. It can be everyone in the community garden is glad to help someone else, I've found. And like Olivia said, just get started.
Okay, and so, excuse me, so would you recommend that someone go to a big box store as a start and just say exactly what you said, which is, hey, I have, a 3x3 plot of land or dirt, and it's shady, not shady or whatever, and then just start from there? Or would you recommend, as you suggested, like reading first, or a combination of those two?
I think I'd recommend a combination of those two. I think one of the things that I would suggest is to read. I think to start with reading about what you're interested in, and as Donna indicated, you really do have to decide what you want to do. Are you going to do ornamental gardening and flowers, or are you going to do food? And reading will really help you. And we are lucky because we live around a land-based university, and like most states, Rutgers offers a lot of advice and a lot of literature and courses to people who are really interested if they want to go further.
So you don't even have to be a student at Rutgers. You can actually just take the one-off class. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Okay, now, excuse me, Olivia, I know that you are a master gardener. Can you explain what that is?
Okay, a master gardener is, I would use the terms that Rutgers uses, an educated volunteer.
Okay.
It's someone who takes a course at Rutgers through the Rutgers Extension and over a period of a year learns a lot about soil and different electives, learn how to garden, when to garden, why to garden. And as trained as a master gardener, you're really an ambassador for the initiatives proposed by the university, trying to enhance plant life, horticulture, according to some of the research and the findings of the university. So master gardeners are really volunteers, and they're expected to volunteer in their communities, around schools, as we do at the community garden, projects, but basically you're a volunteer.
It sounds like you're basically a goodwill ambassador
Yes.
for gardening.
Right.
Okay. That leads me to what we were discussing a little bit earlier. So I know in South Orange we have a community garden. Could you explain a little bit about what that entails? How big is it and that kind of thing?
Well, the community garden started through our old village president. Initially, it started with volunteers, like
Okay.
most community projects. And we have a total of, 17 plots?
49.
49 plots, 17 rows, sorry.
Oh,
49
okay.
plots. And open to residents of South Orange. It entails registering at the beginning of the gardening season, which actually is about to start in terms of registration, not in terms of planting.
Okay.
And so residents can go and volunteer. Residents can go and sign up, hoping to get a plot. It's open to the public, and so it's first come, first serve.
Okay.
And what it entails basically is a person who's interested getting and securing a plot, and then planting either flowers or ornamental or vegetable gardening.
Okay. And Donna, do you notice, I know that you're also part of the community garden, do you notice that people tend to plant either flowers or produce or a combination, or what do you think the majority of people?
Most people plant produce, or at least some produce. And sometimes people will dress it up with some flowers, or there are certain flowers that are believed to ward off pests, like marigolds,
Okay.
so we see those. And some people, plan on a cutting garden, especially that'll be looking nice towards the end of the summer when some of the produce isn't looking so good. The thing I wanted to mention about the community garden is that it is purely volunteer run. The town doesn't maintain it, didn't build it. It was all volunteers.
Wow.
So that really kind of makes it more of a tighter knit community doing all that work
Yes.
together to build it. And now not so much as to maintain it as that first effort, but we have work days which we do before to get it cleaned up and ready, get the beds prepared, and throughout the season we have maintenance days for like weeding, fixing the fences, etc.
From a certain groundhog that manages to get inside all the time.
So a
with the pests.
mascot, that's our local mascot.
But one thing that, anyone who's looking at this, and maybe if they're not intimidated by gardening, but they may not understand, like, why would I go out and grow my own produce? Why would I go out and buy my own flowers if I can easily go to the local supermarket and buy those things? Like, what do you all feel are the benefits of actually growing your own produce and flowers and things like that?
I think one of the major advantages has to do with the fact that our garden is an organic garden. And so I think gardeners there get a chance to see a difference from a produce that's chemically produced and one that's organically produced. And I think also the joy of kind of starting from scratch
Okay.
and educating children, especially if they're children in the home, gardeners with young children or friends. I think you get a chance to learn something new. And I think that's one of the major benefits. I mean, we can make the joke about the $500 tomato because a fair amount of time of organic gardening and planting your own produce could be more expensive than buying in a supermarket. But I think the major advantage is to start and promote this idea of healthy living and to have gardeners see that they could do this too and they could produce their own food. And the sense of a community exchanging ideas and exchanging produce as well.
Okay, and Donna, do you have anything to add?
And also you can grow such a variety that is not available in the store, and grow, exactly what you want to grow and how much of it. And like Olivia was alluding to, sometimes you exchange with your neighbor when you have like way too many tomatoes and they have Swiss chard that you want, and or zucchini. And so it was kind of fun that way. Because like I said before, vegetable gardening was new to me. I was amazed at the variety of eggplants that were grown. I didn't even know eggplant had a beautiful flower. The variety of tomatoes and the different lettuce, it was really just mind-boggling. And it also made me appreciate more where food comes from and how seasonal it is, which, because we can get anything at any time from the market, we don't realize that.
Okay.
We forget.
Wow, that's great, because I think a lot of times people don't quite get why people garden, and so that's a great explanation. You mentioned that you also see young children, and that it's a great benefit for them. I'm just curious, Olivia, like in Master Gardening, do they talk at all about how to foster gardening toward younger, like toward I don't know, maybe teenagers or even younger children?
There is a section of the program where you can take one of the electives, teaching children about gardening, creating butterfly gardens, creating gardens with herbs and children-friendly flowers, and really kind of introducing a younger generation of kids to gardening. The 4-H Club still exists throughout America, and they also are part at times of the Rutgers Extension initiatives.
Okay.
So we see a lot of young people who are still involved in farming and gardening, and that's really very encouraging. So there are a lot of electives towards helping children learn about gardening.
Okay. Is there anything that you would like to add about younger people, or just because I know a lot of people have the stereotype that it's just women who are, gardeners, and they don't see the variety. I mean, there are people who are of different ages and younger people, and I don't know if you wanted to.
Gardening cuts across all ages, socioeconomic status. Everything. Everybody can make some sort of connection to nature, or even if it's just about the food, which sometimes kids, that's all they may be interested in, growing what they like to eat. But on the other hand, like you were saying, the satisfaction of starting a seed and seeing something grow that you tended, and those are very good lessons for children to learn, that something can respond to their care.
Okay. Well, we are almost out of time for this segment, but during the next segment, I'd like us to go over some of the specific tools that you would recommend, whether they're books or different literal tools for gardening. But one last thing I wanted to ask you about was when you're thinking about, I know that you mentioned that the community garden in South Orange is a couple of years old. What is one thing that you would say that to people to encourage them to start their own gardening?
I think what I would say is to think about how they want to impact another generation of people and on the earth, and to think about the benefits that it would bring to us if we understand how to garden well and how to garden successfully, and that we need plants. They provide us with our oxygen. They keep our earth the way it is, and so that's what I would say, that doing community gardening is part of passing on the torch to another generation of gardeners. Okay.
Anything that you'd like to say before we break?
That gardening is accessible to anyone at any age, and not to be intimidated by thinking it's too much work, because there are tools that make things easier, or just narrowing the scope of your project to something that you can handle. I mean, everybody can do a little bit of gardening.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're actually going to break right now, and we're going to come back in a few moments.
In this economic downturn, libraries across New Jersey are reporting jumps in attendance of as much as 50% over the past year. Nearly 200,000 people use our computers every week.
Who'd have guessed that I'd be job hunting at my age? After spending several hours at home trying to upload my resume, I was just overwhelmed. My library showed me how to do it. Now I'm gaining back my confidence.
New Jersey libraries are transforming lives. Tell us your story.
Hi, we're back. I'm Dustin, and I am here with Olivia Lewis-Chang and with Donna Beaton, and we're going to continue with the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that one can use to get started in gardening. So let's get started. We were talking a little bit about getting started with gardening, and out of the tools that we have quite a few tools right here. Which tool would you use, would you start with? Like if you're just starting to get your hands into the dirt and understanding gardening.
Okay. I think to keep it basic and to keep it cheap for most gardeners, and so as not to intimidate a beginner, I think I would say that there are like 4 things that I would definitely want if I would start gardening. And one of them would be the spade or the shovel to dig in the earth, the hand trowel, and compost.
You use this for composting?
No, this would be to dig in the dirt. And compost.
Oh, this is compost. Okay. Can you explain, for people who do not know what a compost pile is, can you explain what it is?
So a compost pile is mostly organic matter, no meat. You leave out any meat or protein except for like eggshells.
Okay.
You have brown matter and green matter. So you'd have grass, you'd have rotted vegetables, and leaves, and in a bin you'd be turning that over, constantly creating heat and water so that it would be rotting, and that matter has so many organisms and worms and all the good earth that you'd need for plant life. And basically that's one of the things that you must put into your soil if you're going to have successful plants and healthy produce. So I think for the beginning gardener, if a gardener is to understand anything, is that the soil is one of the most important components, along with weather, of course, and where you are on the planet, and and a pair of gloves, of course.
Okay, so those are the 4 things: this shovel, this what did you call this again?
Hand trowel.
There's a hand trowel and a compost bin of some sort, and a pair of gloves.
Pair of gloves.
Okay, and what would you say are the most important things for the beginning gardener?
Well, to pick out tools that will make it easier for you. I prefer to use a narrow spade like this because it's easier to push it into the soil, and that one you can step on and use your weight rather than really muscling your way through when you need to dig a fairly large hole. I always use 2 different size trowels, like a narrow one for small planting. Again, it's easier to get into the soil, or that can be used just to dig a small hole for bulbs.
So this one is more for like bulbs and things like that?
Yeah, this is when you need to, say, transplant a pot plant that you've gotten from the store, and you need a bigger hole for it. If you have problems with grip, you can get tools that have different shaped handles that are easier to grip in various positions.
So these 2 are these ergonomically
this one you can, whatever
tools?
you need to grab. This one's for whacking at weeds or roots.
Okay.
Also, again, keeping comfort in mind, this is a kneeling pad.
I think gardeners.
That's important.
Yeah, I also think gardeners have to remember that they have to have some form of exercise, because I think if you're in the garden a lot, you're going to be twisting and turning and bending and kneeling and standing, and so it's one thing to have all these tools, but if you're not also kind of paying attention to how your body works, and the fact that you should also be doing some form of stretching and figuring out a way to kind of keep your body supple and flexible.
That's a great point, because I don't think most people think about that, because as you mentioned, you are going to be on your knees and either pulling or tugging and things like that. So I guess it is not only is gardening a workout, but you also need to prepare your body in order to effectively garden, so that you're not feeling the next day like, oh, I don't want to garden anymore.
Yes.
Exactly.
And gardeners do suffer a fair amount of injuries if they do not pay attention to what they're doing.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Now I want to move on to the books. We have a few books up here. Can you tell me? Let's start with the Square Foot Gardening book. What is square foot gardening?
That's actually a book that was written many, many years ago, but the concept has still remained popular. Instead of planting in rows when you have limited space, you're wasting all that space in between the rows, that you can divide, say, for example, the community garden, you get a 4 by 12 foot plot. You can divide it into a grid of 48 square foot areas and plant a certain number that he goes through the recommendations in that book in each square, and you'll make that plot far more productive than if you plant it in rows. Also, if you plant the way it's recommended, you aren't wasting a lot of seedlings if you plant a whole row and then you end up spending a lot of time thinning them out.
Oh, okay.
You just plant less in a more spread out 1 foot or 2 foot area. You reduce that amount of work.
So would you recommend square foot gardening for the novice gardener or for someone who's more advanced, or does it even matter?
I tried it my first year and it was successful, and we had another gardener who had children and she made it a little more fun. She made triangular shapes rather than just square feet.
Cool.
So you can adapt it for whatever how you want to do it.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I tried it this year, and I thought it was fairly successful. It was a fair amount, a lot of produce in a very small space.
Really?
Yes, yes.
So this is not only good for people who actually have a community garden plot, but also for people who have maybe a smaller amount. Like, could you actually use square foot gardening like in container gardening? Like if you have a big enough container?
Yeah, you could.
Or think of each container as the square foot.
Right, and then
Okay.
figure out how to maximize that space.
Okay. So let's go on to the next book, The Essential Garden Library, The Scented Garden.
You're right.
So,
That's one of my favorite books.
Okay.
And because I feel like gardening, I think people sometimes forget why we garden, and a fair amount of gardening, we're drawn in by our senses. And the sense that's probably the most played upon is not the sense of sight, as most people think about, but actually the sense of smell. Because we're drawn into gardening because of how things smell. And that really kind of activates our emotions. I mean, most times if you think about relaxing in a garden, although you think you're looking at things, you're actually smelling things. So the smell of a rose, the smell of lavender. So the Scented Garden, that book actually is one of my favorite books, and I spent a fair amount of the winter months going through it, kind of imagining what my garden could look like
and so
if I was able to grow some of those things.
Smell like.
Yeah, and what it would
Exactly.
smell like. Right.
So that sort of gives you a guide as to
Right.
like the
Kinds
what
of
you could-
flowers that would bring birds and bees, as well as
Oh, okay.
draw us in more and more.
Oh, wonderful. And the next book is Garden of Paris.
Yes, my favorite, my favorite book. I don't know if people think about where their favorite gardens are, and I think a fair amount of gardening is based on what you've seen and how you feel about what you've seen. And a fair amount of home gardens in the state of New Jersey. There are a lot of private gardens that are very beautiful, and my favorites are in Europe and in Paris,
Okay.
in the east side of Paris, where you have a lot of houses that stand alone, a lot of private gardens that you could walk along. So
this
is
book
actually a sketch. This artist actually sketches a lot of the gardens throughout Paris and along the Champs-Élysées and other parts of Paris.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thinking of sketching, I don't know if this goes along with the square foot gardening book, but if someone has an idea of what they want to garden for the summer or into the fall, should they take the time to sketch, or should they just go out there and just if I like tomatoes, I just want to plant heirloom tomatoes or Roma tomatoes? What would you suggest then?
The garden plot.
This is the garden planner.
It's a little obsessive, but I think for most gardeners, and Donna could probably speak to this too, but I think when you first start a garden, maybe it's all impulse. But I think as you become more seasoned and as you figure out what you want and as you see what has failed and what has been successful, I think, especially in the Northeast, we have the privilege in the winter of being indoors, so we could kind of plan what we want our gardens to look like, what we're thinking about. We could go through seed catalogs, and I think it's a good time. And I think you're right, sketching a garden is probably one of the least expensive ways to garden, because it will also kind of tell you what you shouldn't be doing.
Okay.
A lot of gardeners learn by trial and error and spend a lot of money unnecessarily, but I think planning a garden is a good idea.
So going along with that, Donna, now that we're coming into the winter months, what would you suggest for the person who is thinking about starting a garden, whether it's a container garden or whether they decide to become part of a community garden? What should they be doing right now?
Well, as Olivia just said, we have this nice respite during the winter where we can recuperate from our gardening efforts and go through magazines and some favorite books, and you can make a grid and plan a vegetable garden or an ornamental garden, or as you were suggesting in a more sketch-like form as in this book, kind of an idea of what you want something about to look like, and find plants that will help you accomplish that goal. Like if you want tall pink flowers in the back, you can read and find something that's appropriate for your moisture conditions, your sun conditions, etc. And even if you want to get more sophisticated as you go along, you can learn how to stagger the bloom times so that you always have something blooming.
Okay.
Same with the vegetable garden, stagger the produce times so that you always have something coming.
So I just want to make clear to everyone who's watching that even though we've talked about books and we've talked about planning, it still is quite manageable to do. It's not like I know that both of you love gardening, so you pour over the books during the winter months. But for someone who does want to sketch and who, you don't have to do a whole lot of that, right, to get started.
No.
You can make your sketch the week before you start planting.
All right, that's great. Setting expectations. You don't have to spend the entire winter doing that. I did want to get into one thing. I know that I have used this is like the most basic thing that people can use when they're just starting to garden, and this is just a cardboard, container. And people would just use this to get started, right?
Yes.
And the nice thing about that is that it's biodegradable, so you can just plant the whole thing in the ground and not have to worry about the pot.
That's
what to do with
right.
the pot afterwards.
Okay, we're running out of time, but I did want to get in. Can you quickly explain what these are?
These are peat pellets, so they're a great way also to start. You soak them in water and they'll plump up, and you'll put your seed right there. And you can put them in a container like this, line them up, and put your seeds in, put the top on, and actually set this outside even before spring is starting to come. And the seeds, when they reach their right temperature, this will act like a mini greenhouse with a cover on it. And
Oh, perfect.
you can get a head start.
And then you just take this and transplant it into the ground, and you don't have to worry about this. It's completely biodegradable. Okay, wonderful. We are just about out of time, but I did want to thank you so much for being here. But if there's one piece of advice that you could give, like the novice gardener to get them started, what would it be?
Get out and get started.
All right, and
Exactly. Get digging.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.